Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alec Sunners. I'm joined here by my colleague Roger Bair, and today we're going to be talking about finding your retirement heaven.
Alec, finding a retirement heaven. That sounds like a great topic. Great, really important to me. I'm uh, I'm about 3 years, actually a little less than 3 years for retirement. So finding heaven is a great topic.
Yeah, I think it's important to me too. I'm about 45 years away from retirement, so I'm getting there too.
All right. Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I think I want to start with a little exercise first. I want everyone watching, whether you're currently retired, whether you're about to retire, or whether you're 45 years away from retirement, I want you to close your eyes and imagine your retirement. So when we say the word retirement, what do you start thinking about? What are the things that come to your head and just sort of start envisioning what your retirement looks like? Some of the things that you might be envisioning are first, a lot of things that come up are you don't have to work anymore. I think that's the first thing that a lot of people think of when they hear the word
Sure.
retirement because they're retiring from something. So
Yeah.
no more work.
Hey, you get up in the morning, you don't have to come in spite of the fact I love my job. It does strike me, the first thing, okay, no work, ton of free time. You don't have to get up at a certain hour in the morning, and then we'll travel. But the bottom line is, okay, when we travel, where are we going to go home to? Where are we going to live?
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it because I think a lot of people get stuck in the mindset of, oh, gonna go retire and live in the old folks' home down in the Florida or the Sunshine State. And that's not always the case for everyone. A lot of people love Florida. They have family there. They move for tax reasons. They move for a variety of reasons. But there is different criteria for every single person that is more important to them that they have to figure out.
So where are you going to end up? Where's your base of operations? Lots of folks talk about relocating in retirement. Is it the beach? Is it a small town? Is it an urban area, a large town, big city, someplace you have visited in the past, read about, saw in a movie, heard friends traveled there? Where are you going to end up?
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember for a lot of people is what you're envisioning now might not be what you envision in the future. So if you might say, okay, I'm going to retire in 5 to 10 years. And right now I'm imagining living on the beach with my wife. Well, in 5 to 10 years, you might say, yeah, the beach isn't for us. And it's important not to get stuck on thinking we have to move to X, Y, or Z. It's important to keep an open mind and think about all of the different places. And, as you grow older, it's important to remember that what you thought you wanted in prior years isn't what you're going to want in future years.
Well, sure. In 45 years, you could really change your mind,
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
Whereas the beach seemed like a great place to retire, you'd say, "Well, no, heck, I've got something else in mind," which is what this slide's about.
Yeah.
So where are you going to end up? There there are there are a ton of websites which address the question, where should you retire? But they all have a set of criteria which weigh certain aspects of the decision differently. And so before you go to the websites, I think what you got to do is sit down and say, what is important to you? What are your priorities? And then maybe go to the websites and look around with your priorities in mind.
And then I think it's important of, all right, you have your priorities, you do your research, you go to these websites and you say, this sounds like the perfect place for us. is to actually go and visit the place that fits your criteria the best. Actually, so if you find, okay, I think Nashville, Tennessee is the best place to retire. Go to Nashville, Tennessee, spend a weekend there, spend a week there, and say, can I see ourselves retiring here? Because it's a lot different visiting a place than just reading about it online.
No question about it. And indeed, your priorities might be a little different once you visit a place that you have intended to retire. I have had folks say they wanted to move to West Virginia. And I said, well, go visit West Virginia. And they came back and said, gee, we can't retire in West Virginia. Um, or West Texas. I had somebody who went to school in West Texas and he wanted to retire. That was their dream. They were going to retire to West Texas. But newsflash, it had changed since he had graduated from college and they had changed and they were miserable there. So they moved on. Definitely, you've got to visit this place you intend to settle down in retirement.
Yeah, and here are just some of the things that you have to think about when you're thinking about retiring, because I think a lot of people, when we meet with them, they say, yep, I want to retire in 5 years and I don't want to pay any taxes when I'm retired. Well, that's just one criteria of figuring out where to retire to. Just because you want to move to a tax-free state doesn't mean that's the only thing you should be thinking about. If you have family around you that is important to you, or if you have grandchildren that you see often, how will moving to a different state affect that part of your life? It might help financially, but from a family side of things, if that's important to you, you have to keep that in mind. And there's other things, like if you want to move to an urban area that you've never lived in all of your life, that might be a bit of a cultural shock for you. So it's, different things that you have to sort of rank as criteria. So for some people, climate might be the most important, and for other people, climate's the least important. So
Sure.
you have to figure out this criteria and sort of come up with your own prioritization or ranking of the different criteria.
Well, and I think it goes unsaid that no place is going to be perfect. There are going to be compromises. You are going to make compromises with regard to your criteria. And in between spouses, there will be compromises. I'll share a little later some of the compromises my wife Audrey and I are making as we consider where to retire. And it's a little humorous, but nonetheless, this I think is the most important step, Alec. You've got to decide what's the most important thing to you. What are the most important items, criteria, and then begin to look for a place and as you say, visit where you choose.
Yeah. So talking about, let's start with financial and how that impacts things where you're moving to. So a lot of people talk about state income taxes. That is a big thing. And here's a list: Alaska, Florida, Nevada, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, Wyoming are all state income tax free, which is great. People hear that and they say, great, I'm going to spend less in taxes. But you have to remember that just because a state has no state income tax, that's not everything when it comes to the financial impact of moving to a state. Because a lot of the times when a state doesn't have an income tax, they have to make up revenue somewhere.
That,
So
well, that's right. I was gonna bust in and say, take Alaska as an example. Everything is expensive in Alaska. The cost of living is very high in Alaska. Yes, they may not have state income taxes, but cost of living, gas taxes, sales taxes in Alaska, very, very high. So you're absolutely right. The tax question is much bigger than simply addressing state income taxes.
yeah, and a really awesome tool you can use to compare the different taxes like property tax, sales tax, gas tax, inheritance tax, et cetera, et cetera. There's a website called retirementliving.com, and you can just click on a state and it'll show you all the different taxes that that state has. So if you see a state on the state income tax free list and you say, okay, what other taxes do they charge? You can find out all of the other things and cost of living, different taxes that you can expect to see when you're living there.
Well, I'll give you a nearby example, and we're going to talk about Tennessee and Florida in the next slide. But we currently reside in Maryland, and right to our north is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Well, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania doesn't tax at the state level retirement plan distributions or pensions. However, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is dotted with these little taxing fiefdoms, and property taxes are very high. My kids live nearby in Pennsylvania, and they pay $12,000 or more in local property taxes up in Pennsylvania. So definitely need to make sure that we're looking at if we're interested in taxes, which is one priority, got to look at the big picture, just not income taxes.
Yeah, and there are plenty of states that we can use to compare, but I think a lot of people think about Florida when they think about moving to a state with low taxes. And I just picked another state from that state income tax free list to compare it to in Tennessee. It's nearby, it's got no state income tax, but the difference between Tennessee and Florida is Tennessee has lower property tax. It also has no estate inheritance tax. Florida, on the other hand, again, no state income tax, doesn't have too high of property taxes. It also doesn't have any estate or inheritance tax. But Florida can have a higher cost of living because the insurance market in Florida can really be devastating. Auto insurance, home insurance. Florida is in that zone for where hurricanes can really affect the insurance costs in the area. So Florida isn't always the best option when you're thinking about states to move to save some money.
Of course, Florida has the ocean and the Gulf. Tennessee does not. So Florida is a destination, if you will. Florida is quite hot. Tennessee really has 4 seasons. So there's the climate angle we could get into.
Yeah, and again, that's so important because for some people, the climate is more important to them than the financial aspects. And some people might say, well, I have family in Tennessee and none in Florida, or vice versa. There's always different aspects. And, I was working with a client and they had just set their sights on they're moving to South Carolina when they retire. They were in Maryland and they said, we're moving to South Carolina when we retire. That's where we want to be. So they moved to South Carolina, and a couple of years after they moved, they said, I think we're going to move back. And the reason that they moved back was because all of their family was still in Maryland. They had grandkids on the way, all of their kids were there, brothers, sisters, everyone was still in Maryland or the surrounding areas. And to them, the family aspect was more important than any other aspect. And they just hadn't thought about that before making that move.
Sure. Well, the next slide is about family and proximity. Do you have children, grandchildren? Do you want to see them? How often do you want to see them? Is it easy if you said, well, we're going to move to Florida and they're in the Carolinas? Is it easy to get back and forth? How often, how involved do you want to be in their lives? As an example, I have children nearby in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, and in Oregon. So my family is spread all over, and so that's a priority of ours, but difficult to achieve.
Yeah. So moving away from the family aspect and back into the sort of type of place that you want to be in when you retire, there's a couple big options. So moving to an urban center is one option that appeals to some people. There are a lot of things to do, a lot of things to see. It's easy usually to travel in and out of these areas, and there's always something to do or friends or family nearby. On the flip side of that,
The
there's a rural
rural
area.
aspect, right, where you drive everywhere. I have a son that lives in Oregon, in Portland, and he loves to walk in town. They walk down the street to restaurant, to grocery shop, etc. That's important to them. Whereas if you live in a rural setting or even a suburban setting, to go most places, you got to jump in the car, and some people would rather not do that. Um, I always kiddingly say my idea of being out in a rural environment is the one of the directions to my house is turned off the paved road. Well, you can't do that in an urban setting.
Yeah. So location, destination, recreation. There are a bunch of different places that you can sort of landmarks you can live by. A lot of people say they want to live on the beach or at the ocean. Some people want to get that log cabin up in the mountains or buy that house on the lake, or like we just talked about, living in that city. So it is walkable. You can walk downstairs and walk to the cafe to get your coffee. Or if you do want to live in suburbia, it's all those decisions you have to make. And Roger, we had mentioned earlier in the webinar here that you are a couple of years from retirement. So this is something that has to be fresh on your mind and your wife's mind about where do you want to retire?
Very, very top of mind, and actually, I can share that if we were going to make a decision about the climate, I think we'd end up getting a divorce because I like the cold and my wife likes hot and humid. So that's off the table. We can't agree on that. And as I said, additionally, we've got family here in the East, in Colorado, in Oregon. So we're really trying to figure out what our priorities are. We definitely want to be near family, but we can't be near all three families. We are interested in a destination, probably mountains or lake or something like that. And as a financial person, I am having one eye looking at the cost of living and the tax effects for a move to Pennsylvania or Colorado. Probably wouldn't move to Oregon in that regard. So this is very top of mind for us, and as you can tell by my description, not an easy decision that we have in front of us.
Yeah. So location is part of that decision, and at that location, it's not just about the scenery. It's not just about the pretty lake you're sitting at. It's about what is around you. So what type of town is it if you're living in a town? Is it a young town with lots of young people that are out and about all the time? Or is it more skewed towards the older generation where there are more things and activities for the older generation to do? It's not just bars and clubs for the young guys. It's different activities that you can do yourselves. And the other thing about recreation is, do you have friends nearby? If you're 65 years old and you're moving to a young town, it could be hard to make new friends in that area because the demographics are just skewed to the younger side. So living by yourself, living close to friends, that's something that you have to think about. And then if you're living in a rural area, how often do you want to travel? Is that something that you love living on the land, you love the open air, the night sky, things like that? Or is it something where you have your home base and then you're traveling every once in a while and seeing new places, doing new things?
This picture reminds me of a historic little town in Germany called Rothenburg. And it's a place I've traveled to, gorgeous little medieval village. But it reminded me, interestingly enough, that it's difficult to look forward in time to realize, as an example, should I live way out in the middle of nowhere in some place that gets 100 inches of snow a year in my 70s and 80s? That might have worked in my 50s and 60s or 40s, but is it the best environment for us to move into in retirement? And the answer is probably no. So you don't want to end up fighting, if you will, fighting the last war. You got to be able to look forward And I think one of the dimensions of looking forward is, as you said, we need to be able to have interaction with people our age and continue to be active and socially glued in.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point about climate. Is some people like that colder climate, but if you are getting 100 inches of snow and you're getting older, that's something you have to plan for. Is someone to
Sure.
clear you out when they can, and it can be difficult, and it's just something to keep in mind. And I know myself and my current fiance, for us, four seasons is something that we really love. We don't like when it gets too cold. We don't like when it gets too hot. We like that change of scenery and things changing every once in a while. We're not just always hot or always cold, or we like that change.
When, pardon me, when President Eisenhower retired from the White House, he moved to Gettysburg, and he moved to a little office actually near the Gettysburg College campus, and they bought a farm near the historic battlefield. And one of the reasons he said he did that is that they wanted to experience all four seasons, and you can living in that small town. So it's a beautiful little town, and that's where he decided to live. But climate is certainly important. If I, as I have shared, if we lived in Michigan, I think she'd be unhappy about half the year because she's chilly when it gets to be about 60 degrees. So climate definitely an important consideration.
Yeah. And then another important consideration that I don't think we've even mentioned yet is healthcare. Is when you are retiring and you're getting older, healthcare becomes more and more important. And the area you choose to live in, you have to make sure you do have proximity to hospitals. And everyone is young at heart, but you have to just come to terms with you're young at heart now, but you are getting older as you retire. And you might be retiring at 65 and you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. But as you get older, if you're still in that same area, it is important to think about different healthcare options.
Sure, sure. If you spend a ton of money on health care or medical care at the end of your life, that's just an indicator. As you age, your need for health care, in particular, preventative care, increases. So if, as my wife said the other day, if we lived way out and I was out chopping wood or something and got hurt, it would be difficult to get good responsive medical care. And I think this certainly, for most people, this is a consideration. Do you need to live in Baltimore, Maryland, or Rochester, Minnesota, or Cleveland, Ohio, near, or in New York City, as an example, where there are very, very large, very well-known, established tier one hospitals? Well, maybe not, but certainly you need to be in proximity to some level of medical care as you age.
Yeah. You also have to consider whether you want to sort of age in place and live in the home that you purchase and you get the nursing care you need at that home as you age, or if you want to start moving into something like a continuing care retirement community where all of your needs will be met as you age. And long-term care is a very scary subject because it can be very, very expensive as you grow older and need more care. And next month's webinar is going to be all about long-term care and how to plan for it.
Well, and I'll tell you, the scary subject for a lot of folks, uh, one person in particular, my dad, they're aging in place in the family home in Finksburg, Maryland. And the scary idea is to move into continuing care retirement community, because that's moving to the home. Well, they're not going to move. He refuses to do it. But the fact is, as we age, doesn't it make sense that you would get away from the very steep steps that if you fell, you'd get injured, fall down, break a hip? Should you have a bedroom on the first floor? All characteristics of the house they don't live in. And really, they should surrender that and move to a continuing care retirement community, which is not the home anymore, not a nursing home environment. It's an environment that you move to that you can continue to flourish, continue to be very active socially, physically, and otherwise. But many people get stuck aging in place in a home that is not suitable for their needs.
And a lot of people get scared because they hear that people talk about, oh, you don't want to move to a place that you're going to end up dying at. Well, if you don't move to these retirement communities, the home you're currently in is the home you're going to die at. So it doesn't matter if you move or if you stay, one of those places will be the last place you live. So you're planning to retire, or you are retired, you just recently retired. Now what? What are the steps you need to start taking to make that decision of where to move or where to fulfill your retirement heaven? And I think the first step is just to establish your priorities. Is it financial? Is it family? Is it healthcare? Is it any of those things that we've spoken about today? What are your priorities? Because everyone's going to be different. So it's important to talk to your family, your spouse, your significant others. What are your priorities? And then once you establish those priorities, is sort of stress test that decision and go through all the different scenarios that could come up and make sure that the decision you're coming up with makes sense for all of the priorities that you have come up with yourself. And then from there, share with your family and friends about, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing. We've thought it out. Here are the reasons why. Get everyone's input. And then after that, make those visits. Don't just read online and say, yep, Phoenix, Arizona, that's the best place for us. Make sure you go and visit, and it is the place you can envision yourself living in once you retire. And then don't get stuck on that location that you don't love. So it's important that you're establishing these priorities. And when you come up with these places, try not to get stuck. It's okay to change that decision. And lastly, list out all of the things that you don't want in a place to retire. Because everyone talks about the things that you do want, but what about the things that you specifically don't want? If you have that don't want list, then you can go and start crossing things off your list because you say, oh, well, this place has this that we hate. We don't want to live there. And make sure you cross those things off.
Right. Don't hesitate to say, oh, good grief, I couldn't live with that. I couldn't live with that weather. I couldn't live with that amount of traffic. Be willing. I think stress test your decision is very important. Be willing to be wrong, to reevaluate, to reprioritize. Test this decision, share and discuss with family and friends, visit multiple times. It's worth taking the time to go through this process and so that your ultimate decision, your ultimate move will be finding your retirement heaven.
Yeah. So if you have any questions and you're currently already a client, please reach out to either Roger and I or your primary advisor. They'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And if this is your first time hearing us speak and you're interested in becoming a client, you can either scan the QR code on your screen or reach out to us by going to our website, financialconsulate.com. So, Roger, any closing thoughts?
No closing thoughts here, Alec. I think I hope this is informative. It's certainly top of my mind, and I think for a lot of retirees, you're thinking about these issues. You need a process, and I hope we have given clients and prospective clients a process they can work through to, as we say, find their retirement heaven.
Well, on behalf of Roger, myself, and the entire Financial Consulate team, I appreciate everyone watching. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Bye-bye.